The letter arrived, sealed in wax made from congealed vampire blood, burning cold against Lysandra Nightveil's fingers. She should have thrown it into the flames the moment she recognized the seal. A raven skull crowned in thorns, the emblem of House Ravenshade. But curiosity, that treacherous thing, made her break the seal instead. You are summoned to bear witness. No signature, no explanation, just an address carved into her memory like a scar. The obsidian palace of Drakthar Bloodrend, perched like a monument to cruelty on the cliffs overlooking the blood-red mists, where she'd loved, where she'd belonged, where she'd been destroyed. Lysandra crumpled the parchment, her hands shaking. 5 years. 5 years since she'd fled that kingdom, since she'd packed everything that mattered into a worn leather bag and run through the shadow roads until the twilight became dawn, until the Gothic spires faded into mortal cities, until she could breathe without tasting iron and ash on her tongue. 5 years since Theron Ravenshade had murdered her family before the entire court, and now he dared summon her back. You're not actually going. Morvana stood in the doorway of their sanctuary, arms crossed over her robes, ancient eyes sharp with concern. Tell me you're not that foolish, child. Lysandra stared at the crumpled letter, at the words bleeding through the wrinkles like wounds. Bear witness. I have to. You don't have to do anything for him. He doesn't own you anymore. He never did, Lysandra wanted to say, but that would be a lie. For 2 years, Theron Ravenshade had owned every piece of her, her nights, her blood, her foolish, breakable heart, until the night he'd stood before his court and executed her family one by one, then banished her to the mortal realm. The memory still tasted like poison and grief. It's not about him, Lysandra said quietly, reaching for her traveling cloak. It's about me. I need to see it with my own eyes. I need to know he's truly chosen another so I can finally let it go. Morvana's expression softened, but worry still creased her weathered face. Then I'm coming with you. No. Lysandra's voice came out sharper than intended. She softened it. I need to do this alone. The journey through the shadow roads took 3 nights. 3 nights of her stomach twisting tighter with each step closer to the kingdom she'd sworn never to see again. The crooked signpost at the border marking werewolf territory. The ancient bridge over the River of Sorrows. The abandoned way station where she and Theron used to meet in secret, stealing moments between worlds. By the time she emerged from the shadows at the edge of Drakthar Bloodrend, the blood moon was rising, crimson and enormous, painting everything in shades of violence and dying hope. The kingdom hadn't changed. Same obsidian towers clawing at the perpetual twilight sky. Same judgmental stares from the pure-blood vampires who watched her walk down the cobblestone streets. They knew her here. Knew what she'd been to their prince, knew how thoroughly she'd been discarded. Lysandra kept her eyes forward, her jaw tight, her Dhampir blood burning beneath her skin like shame, and walked toward the palace. The obsidian palace rose from the cliffside like something born from a nightmare, all sharp angles and blackened stone, surrounded by blood gardens where carnivorous roses fed on the essence of the damned. Carriages lined the long approach, expensive and gleaming with dark enchantments. The court had come out in force for this, for her replacement's coronation. Lysandra stopped at the palace gates, hands gripping the iron bars. Her reflection stared back at her from the polished obsidian. Dark circles under amber eyes. Auburn hair with crimson streaks pulled back severely. The faded scar across her throat barely visible above her cloak's collar. the only proof that what they'd had was real. She looked tired, looked broken, looked like exactly what she was, a discarded half-breed returning to watch her monster crown his queen. Good, she thought bitterly. Let him see what he did. The grand hall blazed with blood-red candlelight and ancient ceremony. Lysandra slipped through the side entrance, keeping to the shadows along the colonnade where servants and lesser beings belonged. No one noticed her. No one ever did. All eyes faced forward toward the dais, where Theron Ravenshade stood beside a woman who could have been carved from moonlight and malice. Lady Seraphine Darkwhisper, daughter of the most powerful pureblood house in the Northern Territories. Beautiful, flawless, everything Lysandra, a Dhampir raised on the fringes of vampire society, could never be. Theron looked exactly as she remembered. Silver-white hair that caught the light like frost, storm-gray eyes that could freeze or burn, aristocratic features that belonged on ancient statues, not living flesh. He wore sovereignty like a second skin, commanding without trying, making even the air around him bow in submission. Even from across the hall, she could feel the weight of his presence pressing against her chest like a physical thing. This is it, she told herself, nails biting into her palms. Watch him crown her. Watch him give her everything he promised you. Then leave. Finally, leave. An elder stepped forward, carrying an ornate crown woven from silver and bone. The blood crown, passed down through House Ravenshade for 1,000 years. The ceremonial words echoed through the hall in the old tongue, ancient and formal and final. Lysandra's breathing went shallow. The scar on her throat burned, but as the crown lowered towards Seraphine's perfect head, something happened. The temperature dropped, not gradually, but all at once, as if winter itself had crashed through the vaulted windows. Every candle in the hall guttered and died. The crown twisted violently in the elder's hands, wrenching itself free. The entire court gasped as the sacred circlet bucked and writhed like something alive, rejecting its intended vessel with furious purpose. It clattered to the marble floor, rolling through pools of ceremonial blood, and stopped directly at Lysandra's feet. Every head turned. Every crimson eye found her in her shadowed alcove, illuminated now by the crown's sudden, impossible glow. Soft silver light pulsed from the bone and metal, growing brighter with each passing heartbeat. And behind Theron, the ancient throne itself, the crimson throne that had chosen every sovereign of Drakthar Bloodrin since the first vampire walked, groaned. Stone scraped against stone with a sound like the earth breaking. The massive seat shuddered, then shifted 6 inches to the side, angling directly toward Lysandra as if drawn by invisible strings, as if bowing. The silence in the grand hall was absolute. Seraphine's perfect composure shattered. What witchcraft is this? But Theron didn't speak, didn't move. He just stared at Lysandra with an expression she'd never seen on his face. Not in their 2 years together. Not even the night he'd destroyed her world. Shock. Recognition. Something that looked almost like terror. And in that moment, standing in the shadows with a crown at her feet, and a throne bowing in her direction, with the blood moon rising full and terrible outside, Lysandra realized with cold, creeping certainty, coming here had been a terrible mistake. The prophecy had awakened, and she was at its center. The grand hall erupted into chaos. Vampires who'd stood frozen in shock suddenly found their voices, some shouting accusations of witchcraft, others demanding explanations. A few of the younger purebloods backing away from Lysandra as if her very presence might contaminate them. The crown continued to pulse at her feet, its silver light now strong enough to cast shadows that danced like living things across the vaulted ceiling. "Silence!" The command came from an ancient vampire stepping forward from the council dais. Elder Kieran Soulweaver, his appearance deceiving in its frailty. Lysandra knew better. She'd seen him once before, years ago, when Theron had still called her his. The elder was older than the palace itself, older than most of the noble houses, and his word carried the weight of 1,000 years. The hall fell quiet, though the tension remained thick enough to choke on. Kieran's eyes, pale as winter ice, fixed on Lysandra with an intensity that made her want to flee. But her legs had turned to stone, rooted to the ancient floor, as surely as if blood magic had bound her there. "The throne has spoken," Kieran said, his voice carrying despite its softness. Each word seemed to echo from everywhere and nowhere at once. "The Crimson Throne recognizes what we have long forgotten. The seat of ancients acknowledges her." "That's impossible." Seraphine's voice cut through the reverent hush, sharp and cold as a blade. "She's Dampier, half-breed filth. She has no claim to anything in this kingdom, let alone the throne." "The throne does not recognize purity of blood alone," Kieran replied. And Lysandra could have sworn she saw the ghost of satisfaction in his ancient features. "It recognizes fate, destiny, the prophecy that was spoken when Lilith Morningstar herself walked these halls." A collective intake of breath swept through the court. Even Lysandra knew that name. Every supernatural creature did. Lilith Morningstar, the first vampire, who'd chosen immortality not through curse or disease, but through sheer force of will, the mother of all their kind. "The prophecy," Kieran continued, turning slowly to address the assembled court, "speaks of one who carries blood of two worlds. One who will sit the throne and teach the eternal night to know the dawn. For 1,000 years, we believed this to be metaphor. We were wrong." He gestured toward Lysandra, and she felt every eye in the hall dissect her where she stood. "Lysandra Nightveil, Dampier, daughter of our world and the mortal realm. The throne has chosen, and the blood crown confirms it." "I don't want this." The words escaped Lysandra before she could stop them, barely above a whisper, but somehow carrying in the unnatural silence. I shouldn't be here." She turned toward the entrance, desperate to escape, to run back through the shadow roads and forget she'd ever returned to this cursed place. But before she could take a second step, Theron moved. One moment he stood on the dais beside his rejected bride-to-be. The next, he blocked the doorway, his large frame filling the archway with predatory grace. Up close, the impact of him was even worse. The sharp planes of his face, the way his presence seemed to pull at something deep in her chest, the storm-gray eyes that held recognition, and something that looked almost like fear. "Don't." His voice dropped low, meant only for her despite the 100 vampires straining to hear. "Don't run! Not again!" The unfairness of it sparked anger through her paralysis. "You don't get to ask that of me, not after— I know!" Something raw and terrible flickered across his perfect features, quickly suppressed, but not before she saw it. 5 years hadn't been kind to him either, she realized. There were shadows in his eyes that hadn't been there before, a tension in the set of his shoulders that spoke of burdens carried too long. But we need to talk. Away from here. Away from them. There's nothing to talk about. You made your choice 5 years ago. Did I? The question sounded almost bitter, and his hand lifted as if to touch her arm, but stopped inches away, as if he knew better, as if he remembered she'd learned to flinch from his proximity, from the monster he'd become that night. Or did someone make it for me? Before Lysandra could process those words, Seraphine's heels clicked sharply against marble as she approached, fury radiating from her like heat. Theron, we have a ceremony to complete. He didn't turn, didn't even acknowledge her existence. When he spoke again, his voice carried the authority that made purebloods twice his age bare their throats in instinctive submission. The ceremony is postponed. You can't be serious. I am your prince. The words came out in a tone that made several vampires in the hall actually drop to their knees. And I'm telling you, we're done for tonight. Seraphine's porcelain face went white with fury. But she stepped back. The crowd began to murmur, uncertain and uneasy, as Theron's attention returned fully to Lysandra. Please. The single word carried more vulnerability than she'd ever heard from him, from any vampire. Stay. 9 nights until the blood moon reaches full. Then if you want to leave, if you choose to reject whatever this prophecy claims you are, I won't stop you. But give me 9 nights to explain, to show you the truth of what happened. Lysandra should have refused, should have shoved past him with whatever strength her Dhampir blood could muster and run until dawn, putting this cursed palace and its impossible throne and its devastatingly familiar prince in her past forever. But that word, fate, echoed in her skull. And despite everything, despite the broken promises and the nights she'd cried herself hollow in her exile, she needed to understand what had just happened. Why an ancient throne had bowed to her. Why a crown forged for pure blood royalty now pulsed with recognition at her feet. Fine, she whispered, the word tasting like surrender and defiance in equal measure. 9 nights, then I'm gone. Prophecy or no prophecy. Relief crashed through Theron's carefully controlled expression before he locked it down again. But not before she saw it. The desperate hope of a man who'd been drowning and just glimpsed shore. Through the crowd, Elder Kieran watched them both with ancient, calculating eyes. And in the shadows between pillars, other members of the Shadow Court whispered among themselves, their faces unreadable, but their postures tense. The blood moon continued its rise beyond the vaulted windows, counting down 9 nights until everything would change, or end forever. Theron led her through corridors she remembered too well, past the library where they'd spent winter evenings tangled together among ancient tomes, past the conservatory where he'd first kissed her beneath night-blooming jasmine. Every step felt like walking through a museum of her own heartbreak, each doorway a monument to what she'd lost. He stopped at a door she didn't recognize, a study she'd never seen before, small and private, tucked away from the main palace thoroughfares. The moment they crossed the threshold, he closed it behind them and leaned against it as if physically barring the world from interrupting. You weren't supposed to come tonight, he said finally, his voice tight with controlled emotion. I got an invitation. Not from me. His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath pale skin. I sent no summons. Someone else wanted you here. Someone who knew what would happen when the crown... He stopped himself, running a hand through his silver-white hair in a gesture of frustration she remembered intimately. We need to talk about what you are. what we are. There is no we, Lysandra said, though the words felt hollow even to her own ears. Something had pulled at her chest the moment Theron blocked her path in the grand hall. Something that felt disturbingly like recognition, like coming home to a place she'd never left. There's been a we for 30 years. Theron moved to the window, moonlight carving shadows across his aristocratic profile. You just didn't know it. Neither did I at first. 30 years. I'm barely 50. She stopped, doing the mathematics of vampire aging in her head. I would have been a teenager. You were 17, traveling through Jarvik Stormfang territory with a caravan of mortals. His voice went distant, as if speaking from memory. I was hunting rogues along the border when I heard the screams. Lysandra's hand went unconsciously to her throat, to the scar she'd carried for 3 decades. The scar she'd been told came from falling on broken glass during the attack. The werewolves. They sensed your damper blood and attacked to kill. You were an abomination to them, half vampire, half human, belonging to neither world. Theron turned to face her, and the anguish in his storm-gray eyes made her chest tighten. By the time I reached you, your throat had been torn open. You were seconds from death. The room spun slightly. She'd never remembered that night clearly. Trauma? The healers had said. The mind protecting itself from horror. But now, with Theron's words, fragments began surfacing. The smell of wet fur, the taste of her own blood, and silver-white hair above her, storm-gray eyes filled with desperate determination. I couldn't let you die. His voice cracked on the words. I didn't consider consequences. I opened my wrist and pressed it to your wound, letting my blood mingle with yours to heal you. Vampire blood can heal mortal wounds, Lysandra whispered, medical knowledge learned in her exile surfacing. But the mixing of blood between vampire and dhampir creates a sanguine bond if the intent is pure and the bloodlines compatible. Theron's hand lifted toward her, but stopped, hovering in the space between them. The moment my blood touched yours, with my desperate wish for you to survive, something locked into place. I felt you, your pain, your fear, your fierce will to live, despite everything telling you to let go. Before Lysandra could respond, before she could process the implications, the study door burst open. Elder Kieran entered without permission, his ancient eyes sharp with purpose. Forgive the intrusion, but the girl needs to understand what she is before the Shadow Court decides to eliminate her. He moved to Theron's desk and pulled a leather-bound tome from thin air. Blood magic, Lysandra recognized. Transportation spell. You were not forthcoming about her bloodline, Prince Ravenshade. Because you would have killed her if you knew, Theron snarled, stepping between Kieran and Lysandra with predatory grace. Perhaps. Perhaps not. Kieran opened the tome to a page marked with crimson ribbon. But she will die anyway if she doesn't understand her heritage. Lysandra Nightveil, you believe yourself tainted, a half-breed. Damper filth, as our more narrow-minded purebloods call your kind. The casual cruelty in his tone made Lysandra's hands clench into fists. I know what I am. You know nothing. Kieran turned the book toward her, revealing an illuminated page depicting a woman of devastating beauty with wings of shadow and light. You are descended from Lilith Morningstar, the first vampire, the one who chose immortality through will rather than curse, who was neither demon nor angel, but something gloriously between. The room tilted on its axis. That's impossible. Lilith Morningstar is legend. Legends are truths wrapped in centuries of embellishment. Kieran's smile held no warmth. Your mother's bloodline traces directly to Lilith's daughter, making you not tainted Dhampir but primordial. The purest vampire blood in existence, diluted only by your human father's contribution, which, ironically, makes you stronger, not weaker. You can walk in sunlight, command blood itself, shapeshift beyond normal vampire limitations. The prophecy speaks of you, Theron added quietly. When blood of two worlds sits the throne, the eternal night shall know the dawn. A primordial Dhampir, bonded to a vampire prince. Together, you would unite all supernatural races, end the pure blood supremacy that strangled progress for millennia. Which is why the Shadow Court will try to kill you, Kieran finished, closing the tome with finality. They've built their power on the hierarchy of pure over mixed. You are their greatest threat. As if his words had summoned them, the temperature in the study plummeted. Lysandra's breath misted in the suddenly frigid air, and from the shadows between bookshelves, shapes began forming. Not solid, not quite liquid. Living blood given form and malice. Blood wraiths, assassins created through the darkest vampire magic. 3 of them materialized fully, their forms shifting and reforming, faces that were almost human, but wrong, distorted. They moved with unnatural speed toward Lysandra. Theron lunged to intercept, but one wraith split into a spray of crimson droplets that reformed behind him. Its clawed hand reached for Lysandra's throat and stopped. Lysandra didn't think, didn't plan. Instinct born from blood older than the kingdom itself surged through her veins like liquid fire. She felt the blood wraiths not as separate entities but as extension of herself, her heritage, her very essence. Stop! She commanded, and the word resonated with power that made the study's windows crack. The blood wraiths froze mid-attack, their forms shuddering with the effort to resist. But Lysandra's will, her primordial authority, was absolute. She felt their composition, understood in an instant how they'd been made, how they could be unmade. Turn on each other, she whispered, testing the limits of her newfound power. The wraiths convulsed. Then, as if puppeted by invisible strings, they attacked one another with the same lethal intent they'd directed at her. Claws of congealed blood tore through liquid flesh. In seconds, all 3 had shredded each other apart, exploding into crimson mist that hung in the air before slowly dissipating. Silence fell like a curtain. Lysandra stared at her hands, which glowed faintly crimson before fading back to normal. What did I just do? You commanded blood itself, Kieran said, and for the first time, she heard something like respect in his ancient voice. Forbidden magic, the rarest gift of primordial bloodline. Most vampires spend centuries trying to master even basic blood manipulation. You did it on instinct. The study door crashed open again. A vampire warrior burst through, scarred, rugged, with one eye covered by an old wound. Captain Draven Ashenblade, Theron's second in command. My lord, I felt blood magic. He stopped, taking in the dissipating mist, Lysandra's glowing hands. Theron's protective stance. By Lilith's blood. She's real. The prophecy is real. How long have you known? Lysandra demanded, turning on Theron. About the bond. About what I am. How long? 30 years, he admitted, and the guilt in his voice was palpable. From the moment I saved you, I knew what you were, what we were, but the Shadow Court was already watching me, already manipulating events. If they'd known you carried primordial blood, if they'd known we were bonded, you would have protected me by telling me the truth. I would have painted a target on your back the size of the kingdom. His composure finally cracked, raw emotion bleeding through. So I stayed away, let you grow up believing you were just another Dhampir. Tried to build my power base strong enough that when the time came, when you were ready, I could claim you publicly and keep you safe. And 5 years ago? The question came out barely above a whisper. When you—
9 nights.
Theron interrupted, his voice breaking. Give me 9 nights to explain everything. The truth about that night, about why I did what I did. About why I've been refusing to fully ascend, refusing to take the throne permanently for 5 years. He's been waiting for you, Draven said quietly. We all knew it. He's been half alive, going through motions, turning away every suitor the Shadow Court offered, waiting for the Dhampir girl with crimson streaks in her hair to come home. Lysandra looked at the 3 men, ancient elder, vampire prince, scarred captain, all watching her with varying degrees of hope, fear, and desperate need. Outside the shattered windows, the blood moon climbed higher, counting down the 9 nights that would determine not just her fate, but the fate of every supernatural creature in the 3 kingdoms. Fine, she said, the word tasting like destiny and doom in equal measure. 9 nights. But then I decide. Me. No prophecies, no bonds, no ancient magic making choices for me. I decide. Theron's relief was palpable, washing through the room like a physical force. But underneath it, Lysandra felt something else through the bond she could no longer deny existed. His bone-deep terror that 9 nights wouldn't be enough. That nothing would ever be enough to make her forgive what he'd done. 8 nights until the blood moon reached full, and Lysandra's patience had run dry. She found Theron in the war room, surrounded by maps and reports, Captain Draven at his side discussing border defenses. The moment she entered, both vampires straightened, sensing the storm that preceded her. Out, Lysandra said to Draven, her voice carrying an authority she was only beginning to understand. The primordial blood in her veins hummed with barely restrained power. Draven looked to Theron, who nodded once. The captain left without argument, closing the heavy doors behind him. You promised me truth, Lysandra said, each word precise and sharp as a blade.
9 nights to explain. We've wasted 1 already.
So explain, Theron. Why did you murder my family? Why did you make me watch while you drained them one by one on the palace steps?
Why did you banish me like I was nothing?
Theron's jaw tightened, his storm-gray eyes flickering crimson at the edges. Some truths are crueler than lies. I didn't ask for your protection from cruelty. I asked for truth. Lysandra, tell me! The shout tore from her throat, and with it came power. Blood mist erupted from her skin, filling the room with crimson fog that swirled like living smoke. Maps on the table curled and blackened at the edges. The temperature dropped until their breath misted in the air. Theron stood his ground, but she saw something flicker in his expression. Not fear of her power, fear of what the truth would do to them both. You want truth? Lysandra's voice went deadly quiet, the blood mist responding to her rage by coalescing into shapes that almost resembled claws.
Then prove the prophecy means something. Prove I'm your equal and not just another dampier you can manipulate and discard.
She moved closer, close enough to see the minute tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched at his sides. Close enough that she could feel the pull of the sanguine bond between them, that treacherous thing that made her want to reach for him even as fury burned through her veins. If I'm truly what that throne claims, if I'm primordial, if I'm your bonded mate, if I'm the one who'll unite the supernatural world, then vampire hierarchy means nothing. Her eyes met his, unflinching. So prove it. Kneel before me. The words fell like stones into still water, ripples of shock spreading outward. Lysandra, you don't understand what you're asking. I understand perfectly. The blood mist writhed around them both now, responding to the intensity of emotion crackling between them. For 1,000 years, pure bloods have stood above dampiers. You've made us servants, called us tainted, treated us as lesser beings only fit to grovel at your feet. So if that's changed, if the prophecy makes us equals, then kneel. Here. Now. Show me this isn't just another manipulation. For a long moment, Theron simply stared at her, and she saw the war happening behind his eyes. Pride. Duty. The weight of centuries of tradition. But underneath it all, something that looked like relief. As if he'd been waiting for her to demand this, to take back the power he'd stolen from her 5 years ago. Then, slowly, deliberately, Theron Ravenshade, vampire prince, heir to the Crimson Throne, one of the most powerful beings in the 3 kingdoms, sank to his knees before her, the blood mist stilled, hanging suspended in the air like a held breath. Not here, Lysandra said, her voice shaking with the magnitude of what she was about to do. In the grand hall, before the court, before everyone who needs to see that the old ways are dead. Something that might have been pain crossed Theron's face, but he nodded.
As you wish.
Word spread through the palace like wildfire. By the time Lysandra and Theron reached the grand hall, it was already filled, vampire nobles in their finery, members of the shadow court watching from elevated boxes, servants and dampiers crowding the edges, desperate to witness what couldn't possibly be happening. Lysandra walked to the center of the hall, to the space before the Crimson Throne that had bowed to her the night before. The crowd parted for her like a sea, whispers rising and falling in waves of speculation and scandal. Theron followed 3 steps behind, the position of a subordinate, not a prince. When she stopped and turned to face him, the hall fell silent. Kneel, Lysandra commanded, and this time her voice carried primordial authority that made the ancient stones of the palace resonate. Theron knelt. The sound of his knees hitting marble echoed like a judge's gavel. Gasps rippled through the assembled court. She heard Lady Seraphine's sharp intake of breath from somewhere in the crowd, saw members of the shadow court lean forward in their boxes, ancient faces twisted with fury or fascination. This isn't enough, Lysandra said, pulling a silver ritual knife from her belt, the same one Elder Kieran had given her that morning when she'd asked what it would take to compel truth from a vampire who'd spent 3 centuries perfecting lies. You're going to swear a blood oath, the old kind, the unbreakable kind. Lysandra. Theron's voice held warning. Blood oaths are binding unto true death, I know. She cut her palm without hesitation, crimson welling from the wound. By blood given and blood taken, by truth demanded and truth spoken, I bind you to answer what is asked,
upon pain of eternal death.
The ancient words tasted like copper and power on her tongue. The hall's temperature dropped another 10 degrees. Somewhere in the crowd, a vampire made a sign against evil. Theron held her gaze for a long moment, and she saw resignation there, acceptance. He took the knife and cut his own palm, deeper than necessary, as if the physical pain was easier to bear than what was coming. Their hands clasped, blood mingling, and the magic detonated. It wasn't gentle, wasn't the slow building of power Lysandra had expected. The blood oath activated like lightning through her veins, searing through nerve and bone, binding them together with chains forged from ancient vampiric law. She felt Theron's presence surge through the sanguine bond, felt his emotions crash over her in waves: guilt, love, desperation, shame, and anguish so deep it made her knees buckle. But she stayed standing, stayed strong, because she needed to know. Why? The question came out raw, stripped of pretense or protocol. Why did you murder my family? Why did you make me watch? Why did you look me in the eyes and tell me I meant nothing while their blood was still warm on your hands? The blood oath compelled truth. Theron couldn't refuse, couldn't deflect, couldn't protect her from the answer anymore. Because the Shadow Court gave me a choice, he said, and his voice broke on the words. Your family's death, quick and clean, or their torture, for decades, using their screams to break your mind until you begged for death, then forcing me to watch as they turned you into a mindless blood slave, kept alive but destroyed for eternity. The hall erupted in shocked murmurs, but Lysandra barely heard them. The blood bond was pulling her deeper, showing her not just words, but memory. She tried to resist, but the oath wouldn't allow it. The world dissolved into vision. 5 years ago. The Shadow Court's inner chamber, lit by blood-red candles. Theron standing before 7 ancient vampires whose faces were hidden in shadow. Elder Kieran among them, his voice carrying quiet menace. We know about the bond, Kieran said. We know what she is. Primordial blood that will destroy everything we've built. You can't. Theron's voice, younger then, less controlled. We can do anything. Another elder, female, her laughter like breaking glass. But we'll offer you mercy, Prince Ravenshade. Kill her family publicly. Make it swift. Make her hate you enough to flee to the mortal realm where our power is limited. She'll live, you'll suffer, and the prophecy stays dormant. And if I refuse? Then we take them all. Her mother, father, brother. We'll make their agony last decades. We'll use blood magic to keep them alive while we flay them, burn them, break them. And we'll make her watch every second. We'll fracture her mind with their suffering until she's nothing but a shell. Then we'll turn that shell into your blood slave, alive but destroyed, and you'll be forced to keep her that way for eternity, knowing you could have spared her. Theron on his knees before them, begging. There has to be another way. There isn't. Choose, Prince. Quick death and hatred, or slow destruction and damnation. And Theron, his face twisting with anguish, making the only choice that wouldn't break her completely. I'll do it. I'll make her hate me, just make it quick. Don't let them suffer. The memory released her, and Lysandra stumbled backward, gasping. The present crashed back. The grand hall, the watching court. Theron still kneeling before her, with his hand bleeding and his eyes filled with 5 years of carried guilt. "I'm sorry," he whispered, and the blood oath ensured those words were absolutely true. "I stole your choice to save your life. I became your monster so you could survive. And I'd do it again, even knowing it would mean 5 years of you hating me. Even knowing it might mean 9 nights isn't enough for you to forgive me." Lysandra's hand went to her throat, to the scar that marked their bond. She understood now. Understood that love and betrayal could coexist in the same action. Understood that Theron had destroyed her world to save her from something infinitely worse. But understanding wasn't forgiveness, and the hole his choice had left in her heart didn't disappear just because she knew his reasons. "You should have let me choose," she said, her voice barely audible in the silent hall. "Even if it meant choosing to suffer. That should have been mine to decide." "I know." Theron remained kneeling, head bowed, utterly defeated. "I know." Lysandra looked at him, this ancient, powerful vampire prince brought to his knees before a Dampier, before the entire court, willingly bearing the weight of his choices and their consequences. Something in her chest cracked, but she wasn't ready to examine what lay beneath. Instead, she turned and walked away, leaving him kneeling in the grand hall. Behind her, she heard the whispers begin, heard Lady Seraphine's sharp intake of satisfaction, thinking this was Theron's downfall, heard the Shadow Court members muttering among themselves. But loudest of all, she heard the blood oath still thrumming between them, felt Theron's presence through the bond, tasted his anguish and desperate hope that somehow, in the 8 nights remaining, she might find a way to understand that he'd chosen the lesser evil and called it love. 7 nights left until the blood moon, and Lysandra had no idea if that was enough time to forgive the unforgivable. 7 nights until the blood moon, and Lysandra woke to find Theron waiting outside her chambers. "Training starts at dawn," he said without preamble, his storm-gray eyes carefully neutral. "The blood gardens. You need to learn control before someone else tries to kill me?" Lysandra finished, pushing past him into the corridor. "Fine, but don't think last night changed anything between us." "I wouldn't dare." But she felt the lie through their bond, a flutter of desperate hope he couldn't quite suppress. The blood gardens sprawled behind the palace, a labyrinth of crimson vegetation that predated the obsidian walls themselves. Blood roses climbed ancient trellises, their petals the color of fresh wounds, thorns that wept red sap. Thornheart vines writhed along the ground, reaching toward any vampire who passed too close, feeding on their essence if they weren't quick enough to avoid the touch. "This is where we train our warriors," Theron explained, leading her deeper into the garden. "The plants respond to vampire blood, to power. They'll attack if you show weakness, retreat if you show strength. You'll learn fast, or you'll learn bleeding." Comforting. But Lysandra felt her primordial blood responding to the garden's presence, recognizing something ancient and hungry in the soil itself. Theron stopped in a clearing where the morning mist hung thick and red-tinged. "First lesson, blood manipulation. Close your eyes. Feel the blood around you." Lysandra obeyed, letting her awareness expand. Immediately, she sensed it. Theron's blood like a beacon of power beside her. The slower pulse of the carnivorous plants, and further away, the scattered presences of palace guards on patrol. Each heartbeat was a drum she could feel in her bones. "Good." Theron's voice came from directly behind her now, close enough that his breath stirred her hair. Now reach for mine. Not to harm, just to feel the current of it. She extended her awareness toward him and felt the moment their connection locked into place. His blood sang to hers, ancient vampire nobility meeting primordial origins. Through it, she felt everything. His elevated heart rate, the tension in his muscles, the carefully controlled desire that spiked when she was near. Her eyes snapped open. I can feel everything. Yes. Theron stepped back, putting necessary distance between them. The bond makes us transparent to each other. It's why blood manipulation is so dangerous. You're not just moving liquid. You're touching the essence of a living thing. Show me more. For hours, they worked. Theron demonstrated how to freeze blood in veins without killing, how to sense poison in a victim's system, how to pull blood from a body in thin streams or explosive bursts. Lysandra discovered she could do in minutes what took pure blood vampires decades to master. Her primordial heritage made the forbidden magic feel natural, instinctive. This is why they fear you, Theron said, watching her make a blood rose's sap flow backward through its stem. Lilith Morningstar could kill with a thought by commanding the blood in her enemies' hearts to stop. You have that same potential. But you're teaching me anyway. Because you need to survive what's coming. His jaw tightened. And because I trust you won't use it the way the Shadow Court fears you will. The second lesson was shape-shifting. Theron demonstrated first, his form blurring into mist, then resolving into a massive bat with silver-white fur, then back to vampire. Purebloods are limited. We can become mist bats, sometimes wolves if we're old enough. But we lose higher consciousness in animal forms. And I won't? Lysandra felt the potential coiling in her blood, eager to be tested. Try it. Think of a raven. She closed her eyes and felt her body shift. Not painfully, but like water taking a new shape. When she opened her eyes again, she was looking up at Theron from a raven's perspective, her vision sharper, her body lighter than air, and most importantly, she was still herself, still thinking, still aware. She took flight, soaring above the blood gardens, feeling the wind beneath midnight feathers. Below, she saw Theron watching with an expression that mixed pride and longing before she dove back down, reforming in front of him in a swirl of shadow and crimson light. Shadow, she breathed. I became shadow between forms. Primordial vampires aren't bound by flesh the way we are. Theron's voice held awe. You're closer to pure essence than any vampire I've ever seen. The third lesson was the one that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Captain Draven had assembled 3 volunteer soldiers, vampires who'd sworn to help train the prophesied Blood Queen, though their nervousness was palpable. Command them, Theron instructed, not with force, but with connection. Your bloodline is the source of all vampire lineages. They'll recognize you if you let them. Lysandra reached out through that strange awareness, feeling the threads that connected her to each soldier. Not bonds like what she shared with Theron, but something more distant, ancestral recognition. She was the origin point, and they were branches of the same ancient tree. Kneel, she said softly, and all 3 dropped without hesitation. Stand. They rose. Draw your swords. Metal sang as blades cleared scabbards. Lower them. The swords dropped. Through it all, she felt their will intact, their consciousness clear. She wasn't overwhelming them. She was offering commands their blood recognized as legitimate, as
right. The difference between compulsion and authority. Enough! She released them, and all three bowed deeply before retreating. You're a natural, Draven observed, his scarred face showing rare approval. Most of the Shadow Court elders can barely command their own bloodline descendants. You commanded strangers. Because she's what they fear most, Theron said quietly. A Dhampir with more authority than any pure blood has possessed in a millennium. The training continued until midday, and through it all, the blood bond hummed between them, impossible to ignore, impossible to suppress. Every time Lysandra felt attraction spike, Theron would tense. Every time his desire flared, she'd catch her breath. The gardens became charged with unspoken tension, years of separation and hurt warring with undeniable connection. This bond, Lysandra said during a water break, unable to bear the silence anymore. It doesn't let us lie to each other, does it? No. Theron's voice was rough. Every desire, every fear, every moment you hate me, and every moment you remember loving me. I feel it all, just as you feel my guilt, my need, my terror that 9 nights won't be enough. It's torture. It's honesty. He met her eyes. For the first time in 5 years, we can't hide behind walls or distance. You feel how sorry I am. I feel that you're beginning to understand even if you can't forgive. The bond won't let us pretend. Before Lysandra could respond, Draven burst into the clearing, his expression grim. My lord, Lysandra, we found something in the catacombs. The necromantic ritual circle was carved into the ancient stone floor of a forgotten tomb. Symbols that hurt to look at directly drawn in what Lysandra recognized as mixed blood. Vampire and something else. Something dead. Elder Kieran arrived moments after them, his ancient face grave as he examined the markings. This is Shadow Court magic. Someone on the council wants your bond severed. How many castings does it require? Theron's voice was deadly calm. 3 nights, and judging by the fresh blood, Kieran touched the sticky residue and brought it to his lips, tasting. They've already completed the first. 2 more nights, and the sanguine bond will be ripped apart, killing you both in the process. Then we set a trap, Lysandra said, her mind already racing through possibilities. Tomorrow night, I'll be here during the second casting. When they arrive? Absolutely not. Theron's hand shot out, gripping her arm. You're not using yourself as bait. Lysandra pulled free, and primordial power flared in her eyes. I kneel to no one, Theron. You've already knelt to me. This is my choice, my life, my bond. I decide how to defend it. Through their connection, she felt his fear crash against her determination, felt him recognize that she was right, that trying to protect her by making decisions for her was exactly what had destroyed them 5 years ago. 6 nights left, she said softly, holding his gaze. And I'm done being protected from my own fate. Theron's jaw worked, but finally he nodded. Then I'm there with you. If you face this, we face it together. Together, Lysandra agreed, and felt something shift in the bond between them. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the first fragile foundation of trust being rebuilt. Tomorrow night, they would face whoever wanted them dead. Tonight, they would prepare. 6 nights until the blood moon, and Lysandra positioned herself in the catacombs like bait in a trap that might kill her. The necromantic ritual circle pulsed with sickly light, symbols carved deep into ancient stone, radiating malevolence that made her primordial blood recoil. She forced herself to stand at its center, every instinct screaming to flee while Theron and Draven concealed themselves in shadowed alcoves, close enough to intervene but hidden from whoever would come to complete the severing. Midnight arrived, with a drop in temperature that turned breath to mist. Lysandra heard footsteps echoing through the catacombs, measured, confident, belonging to someone who believed themselves alone. A hooded figure entered the chamber, carrying a leather satchel that clinked with glass vials. They moved to the ritual circle with practiced ease, kneeling before pulling a silver athame from the bag. When they began chanting in the language of the dead, guttural syllables that predated even vampire tongue, Lysandra's skin crawled with wrongness. The figure's hood fell back. Lady Seraphine Darkwhisper's porcelain face twisted with rage and obsession, her ice-blue eyes reflecting the ritual's crimson glow. "I knew you'd come, predictable half-breed." "Seraphine," Lysandra kept her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "The Shadow Court is using you. Can't you see?" "Using me?" Seraphine laughed, the sound brittle and sharp. "They promised him to me. Centuries of alliance, of breeding rights, of political marriage. Then you—" She spat the word like poison. "You crawl back from exile and steal what's mine with your tainted blood and prophecy nonsense. He was never yours." Lysandra felt Theron's presence in the shadows, felt his tension through their bond. "The sanguine bond chose me 30 years before you were even born. An abomination!" Seraphine slashed her palm with the athame, blood flowing freely onto the sigils. "Half-breed filth pretending at power. I'd rather see him dead than bound to something like you." The ritual activated. Dark energy erupted from the circle, lancing toward Lysandra like spears of congealed night. The moment it touched her, agony exploded through every nerve. The sanguine bond, that golden thread connecting her soul to Theron's, began to fray, unraveling strand by strand. Lysandra screamed. In the shadows, Theron collapsed to his knees, his own cry of anguish echoing through the catacombs. Through their fragmenting connection, she felt his soul being torn away from hers, felt the bond that had existed for 30 years, dying like a living thing, being slowly strangled. Footsteps thundered down the corridor. Elder Kieran burst into the chamber with palace guards, taking in the scene with ancient, calculating eyes. "Stop the ritual!" "We can't." Draven emerged from concealment, his scarred face pale with horror. "Interfering with necromancy mid-cast will create magical backlash that'll kill everyone in the catacombs." Seraphine advanced on Lysandra, the ritual dagger gleaming in her hand. "If I can't have him, I'll take something better. Your primordial blood. They say drinking it fresh transfers power. I'll become what you are. Pure, ancient. Chosen? And he'll have no choice but to accept me." Lysandra tried to move, to defend herself, but the severing magic held her immobile. Each second felt like eternity as the bond continued fraying. She could barely feel Theron anymore, his presence dimming like a candle in a storm. No. The thought came from somewhere primal, somewhere that predated consciousness. This bond is mine. My choice. My fate. Lysandra stopped fighting the severing magic and instead reached deep into her primordial bloodline, into the power that had slept dormant for 50 years. She didn't resist the necromancy. She touched it, understood it, and with a surge of will that felt like igniting her very soul, she reversed it. Power exploded outward. Her eyes ignited blood red, pupils blown wide with ancient authority. Her body lifted from the stone floor, levitating as primordial magic poured through her in waves of crimson light. The air itself screamed, and from her back, tearing through cloth and flesh without pain, massive wings unfurled, wings made of liquid shadow and blood that weren't quite solid, constantly shifting and reforming, dripping essence that evaporated before hitting the ground. They spread 20 feet across, beautiful and terrible, a physical manifestation of power that hadn't walked the earth since Lilith Morningstar herself. Kneel. Ugh. The single word detonated through the catacombs with enough force to crack stone. The authority in Lysandra's voice transcended vampire hierarchy, reached into the very blood of every supernatural creature present, and commanded at a level that couldn't be resisted. Seraphine was slammed to the ground so hard her bones audibly cracked, her ritual dagger clattering away. Draven dropped instantly. Elder Kieran, ancient and powerful beyond measure, sank to one knee, his face showing shock for the first time in centuries. Even Theron, still suspended in the severing magic's grip, collapsed in submission. But Lysandra's control was surgical. The moment they knelt, she released them, all except Seraphine, proving she could command and free at will, that she wielded authority through choice, not compulsion. The severing magic, caught in the reversal, backfired catastrophically onto its caster. Seraphine screamed as necromancy designed to tear souls apart turned inward, the death magic she'd wielded consuming her from within. Her porcelain skin grayed and cracked, taking on the appearance of a corpse. Her midnight hair dulled to ash. The rot spread visibly across her flesh, punishment for violating the sacred nature of sanguine bonds. Guards surged forward, seizing the now weakened Seraphine. As they dragged her toward the exit, she thrashed and shrieked with a voice that had already half died. "You think you've won? He's already here! Archon Valdris waits in Varnock Ironclaw with his hybrid army. The Shadow Court has allied with him." "Take her to the cells," Theron commanded, his voice hoarse from the severing's agony. But Seraphine wasn't finished. "In 5 nights, under the full moon, they'll harvest your blood and kill everyone you've bonded with. Your completion is their deadline. If you transform fully, you become too powerful to take. If you reject the prophecy, your power will be at its peak vulnerability. Either way, they've already won." The guards hauled her away, her ravings echoing through stone corridors until distance muted them to whispers. Lysandra's wings dissolved into crimson mist, her body lowering back to the ground. The moment her feet touched stone, her knees buckled. Exhaustion crashed over her like a physical wave, the primordial power retreating as fast as it had come, leaving her hollow and shaking. Theron caught her before she fell, his arms wrapping around her with desperate strength. "I've got you. Always." Through their bond, miraculously intact, stronger even than before the severing attempt, she felt his terror transforming into fierce protectiveness, felt his awe at what she'd become, felt his love, undimmed by 5 years of separation or the horror of what he'd done. "I'm scared," Lysandra whispered against his chest, too exhausted to maintain the walls she'd built between them. "What if I become something you can't love? What if the prophecy transforms me into something? Not me." Theron's hand came up to cradle her face, forcing her to meet his storm-gray eyes. Impossible. I've loved you in every form. When you were 17 and dying. When you were 20 and discovering your heritage. When you hated me so thoroughly, I felt it through the bond every waking moment. Human blood, vampire blood, whatever you become when the full moon rises. My soul knows yours. That doesn't change. 5 nights, Elder Kieran said quietly from where he still knelt, his ancient face grave. Archon Valdris will come for her in 5 nights. We have very little time to prepare. Then we prepare, Lysandra said, finding strength she didn't know she possessed. And we face him together. But as Theron carried her from the catacombs, her blood wings leaving trails of crimson light in the darkness, she couldn't shake Seraphine's final warning. The Shadow Court had allied with their greatest enemy, and the countdown to the blood moon had become a countdown to war. 5 nights until the blood moon, and Theron carried Lysandra through passages she'd never seen, servant corridors and hidden walkways known only to the royal bloodline. Her exhaustion was bone deep, the manifestation of blood wings having drained reserves she didn't know she possessed. "Where are we going?" she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Somewhere safe, somewhere sacred." Theron's arms tightened around her. "Somewhere the Shadow Court can't reach." They emerged into a glass conservatory that took Lysandra's breath away. The Blood Rose Pavilion was a marvel of crystal and moonlight, filled with flowers she'd only read about in ancient texts, bioluminescent blooms that existed in shades of crimson and gold, their petals seeming to hold captured starlight. The moment Theron carried her across the threshold, the flowers responded. One by one, they ignited with inner radiance, their glow intensifying until the entire pavilion blazed like the heart of a dying star. The light pulsed in rhythm with Lysandra's heartbeat, with the bond thrumming between her and Theron. "They bloom for bonded mates," Theron said softly, lowering her onto a cushioned bench surrounded by the radiant flowers. "They haven't lit like this in centuries, not since my grandparents." Lysandra stared at the impossible beauty around them, tears pricking her eyes. "It's responding to us, to what we are, to what we've always been." Theron knelt before her, not in submission this time, but in intimacy. "Lysandra, we need to talk about what Seraphine revealed, about Archon Valdris." The name fell between them like a stone into still water. "Tell me," Lysandra said, forcing herself to focus despite the exhaustion. "Tell me what's coming." Theron's jaw tightened. Valdris Nightbane was once a Shadow Court member, one of the oldest. 200 years ago, he proposed that pure bloodlines were evolutionary dead ends, that only hybridization could create true immortality. When the court rejected his theories, he took his research to Varnock Ironclaw and began experimenting. Experimenting on what? On everyone. Vampires, werewolves, witches. Combining bloodlines through force, through blood magic and necromancy. Creating hybrids that should be impossible. Theron's voice went hollow. Most died screaming. The ones that survived became his army, creatures with vampire speed, werewolf strength, witch magic. Abominations bound to his will. Lysandra's hand went to her throat. "And he wants my blood." "Your primordial blood is the final ingredient. With it, he believes he can create perfect hybrids, immortal beings with all supernatural strengths and none of the weaknesses. He'd harvest you, drain every drop, and use it to transform his army into something unstoppable." And the Shadow Court allied with him because your prophecy threatens their supremacy as much as Valdris's hybrids do. But at least with Valdris, they'd maintain their position as elders. With you, Theron's eyes met hers. With you, everything changes. Pure blood hierarchy crumbles. Dampiers gain equality. The old ways die. So they'd rather see me dead than lose power. Bitter understanding flooded through Lysandra. The prophecy was never about saving the supernatural world. It was about destroying their control. Which is why they'll stop at nothing to prevent your transformation. Theron's hand lifted, hovering near her face. Lysandra, if you complete the prophecy on the full moon, do you understand what that means? Full ascension. Becoming something not human anymore. The fear she'd been suppressing since the blood wings manifested finally broke free. I'll lose myself. Become just another vampire. Just another monster. No. Theron's hand cupped her face with infinite gentleness. I wondered that for 300 years. Whether immortality cost me my soul. Whether I was still the person I'd been when I was mortal. Then I met you, 17, dying, half vampire and half human, and entirely fiercely yourself. You taught me that we are what we choose, not what we're born as. But the prophecy is offering you a choice, not a transformation. His thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. You've been kneeling to no one, forcing me to kneel, making everyone see you're not lesser. It's time I stood beside you, not above, not below, beside. I thought you looked good on your knees, Lysandra said, a watery laugh escaping despite everything. I wanted you to understand what it felt like to have your power stripped away. Theron's smile was sad and knowing. You do now. So rise, Theron Ravenshade. Stand beside me as my equal, or I face this alone. Theron rose slowly, and as he did, the blood bond between them flared with new intensity. No longer fraught with guilt and resentment, but burning with possibility, with conscious choice. I never stopped loving you, Lysandra whispered, the admission torn from somewhere deep. Even hating you, even wanting you dead, I loved you. I know. Theron's forehead touched hers. I felt every moment of your heartbreak through the bond. Every tear, every sleepless night, every time you looked at your scar and remembered what we were. It nearly destroyed me. When he kissed her, it wasn't gentle. It was 5 years of separation and longing, 30 years of unconscious bond, centuries of his existence finding meaning in this one Dampier woman who refused to be anything but herself. The sanguine connection blazed between them, blood magic and genuine emotion intertwining until Lysandra couldn't tell where she ended and Theron began. Around them, the blood roses bloomed brighter, their light pulsing with the rhythm of shared heartbeats. They tumbled onto the cushions together, Theron's careful control finally shattering as Lysandra pulled him closer. Desperate to feel something other than fear and exhaustion, his hands mapped the plains of her body like reclaiming lost territory, and through the bond, she felt his reverence, his desperate need, his terror that this might be the last time. We're not dying, she gasped against his mouth. Not to Valdris, not to the Shadow Court, not to anything. Promise me. I promise. And in that moment, With the blood bond singing between them and the sacred flowers bearing witness, she meant it. Morning light filtered through the glass conservatory hours later. Gentle dawn that didn't burn vampire flesh within this sacred space. Lysandra lay tangled in Theron's arms, her head on his chest, listening to his unnecessary heartbeat. "Would you have told me the truth eventually?" The question emerged quiet and raw. "Or would you have let me hate you forever?" Theron's hand stilled where it had been tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "I don't know. Every day, I wanted to confess. Every day, I feared the truth would hurt you more than the lie. I was a coward." "Yes." Lysandra tilted her head to meet his eyes. "But you were my coward, trying to protect me the only way you knew how. It wasn't forgiveness, not complete, not yet. But it was acceptance. Understanding that love and mistakes could coexist, that someone could destroy you while trying to save you, and that the path forward lay not in forgetting, but in choosing to rebuild anyway." The pavilion doors burst open. Captain Draven stood in the entrance, his scarred face grim.
"My lord, Lysandra, Seraphine's escaped."
The peace shattered like glass.
"How?"
Theron was on his feet instantly, pulling on discarded clothing with vampire speed.
"Blood trail from the dungeons toward the shadow roads. Inside help, someone on the guard betrayed us."
Draven's jaw tightened.
"Worse, she took forbidden texts, the ones about the full moon ritual."
"She knows how to corrupt the transformation," Lysandra breathed, horror dawning. "How to twist it from the inside." Elder Kieran materialized in the doorway behind Draven, his ancient face showing rare urgency.
"There's more. I've examined your blood under moonlight, child. Your Dhampir nature isn't weakness. It's the key to everything."
He moved into the pavilion, and the blood roses dimmed slightly in deference to his age. Lilith Morningstar wasn't turned vampire. She chose immortality while retaining her humanity. You carry that same choice in your blood. The prophecy doesn't require you to become fully vampire. It requires you to remain Dhampir while ascending. Lysandra's world tilted. Blood of two worlds means staying both? Precisely. Not choosing one over the other, but embracing the duality. Kieran's eyes held something like pride. Some of us are bridges, not shores. We belong everywhere and nowhere, and that, child, is your greatest strength.
4 nights,
Theron said, his hand finding Lysandra's.
4 nights until Valdris comes for her.
Then we have 4 nights to prepare for war, Lysandra replied, squeezing back. The blood roses pulsed once more, bearing witness to their resolve. The sanctuary had given them truth and intimacy. Now they would need it to give them strength for what was coming.
The throne room was a monument to madness. Walls constructed from fused bones, vampire, werewolf, human, all melted together into grotesque architecture that seemed to breathe. The floor was covered in blood that never dried, never coagulated, flowing in slow currents like a crimson sea. And at the chamber's heart sat a throne built from the spines of failed hybrid experiments, each vertebra a testament to Valdris's obsession. Archon Valdris Nightbane rose from that obscene seat, and Lysandra's breath caught despite her determination. He appeared as a man in his prime. Dark hair, sharp features, the kind of beauty that predatory things possessed. But the illusion shattered upon closer inspection. 4 arms extended from his torso, each ending in hands that shifted between clawed and human. His eyes were compound like an insect's, multifaceted and reflecting light in unnatural patterns. His skin rippled, scales appearing and vanishing, flesh warring with whatever he'd become. When he spoke,
His voice resonated with multiple tones. Human, animal, and something else entirely. The prophesied Blood Queen. You're smaller than I expected. Prophecies tend to surprise people. Lysandra kept her voice steady despite the horror before her, despite the exhaustion from fighting through his fortress. Valdris laughed, the sound echoing strangely in his transformed throat. I've studied you, little Dampier, watched you grow from frightened girl to reluctant queen. You're magnificent, proof that my theories are correct. Your theories are abominations. No. He descended from the throne, moving with fluid grace despite his modifications. Pure bloodlines are evolutionary dead ends, stagnation masquerading as superiority. Hybrids are the future, combining strengths, eliminating weaknesses. Your primordial blood is the final ingredient. He circled her like a predator evaluating prey. With it, I'll create immortals who walk in sunlight, shift into any form, cast spells that reshape reality and never age. We'll be gods, you and I. Rule beside me. Together, we'll remake the supernatural world. You don't create hybrids, Lysandra said, her anger rising. You enslave them, strip away their choice, and call it evolution. Choice is an illusion. Power is the only truth. Then let me show you real power. Valdris attacked. He moved faster than should be possible, forearms striking from multiple angles while vampire speed carried him across the blood-soaked floor. Lysandra barely dodged, her blood wings manifesting to propel her upward. But Valdris had prepared. The blood covering the floor responded to his will, rising in crimson waves that crashed against Lysandra like physical force. She countered with her own blood manipulation, freezing the waves mid-surge, but he was already casting, witch magic woven through vampire enhancement creating spells that shattered her defenses. They fought in 3 dimensions. Lysandra's wings carried her to the vaulted ceiling, while Valdris climbed walls with spider-like agility. She shifted to raven form. He matched with something chitinous and winged that shouldn't exist. She became blood mist. He dispersed into thousands of flies that reformed behind her. I've studied primordial bloodline for 800 years, Valdris said, his compound eyes tracking her every movement. I know your abilities better than you do. He was right. Every technique Lysandra attempted, he countered. Every transformation he matched. The throne room became a kaleidoscope of shifting forms and blood magic, neither gaining advantage, until Valdris changed tactics. Blood from the floor suddenly coalesced into chains, not metal, but crystallized essence forged from his victims over centuries. They wrapped around Lysandra's wrists, ankles, throat, pulling her down to the crimson floor with inexorable strength. You're strong, Valdris said, resuming his base form as he approached her struggling figure. But untrained. Raw potential against 8 centuries of refinement. The outcome was inevitable. He produced silver needles from his robes, each inscribed with harvesting runes. This will hurt. I'd apologize, but pain is just sensation, meaningless in the face of what we'll achieve. The first needle pierced her arm, and Lysandra screamed. It wasn't just physical agony. The needle drew her primordial blood, her very essence, out through mechanisms she didn't understand. She felt her power draining like water through a sieve, felt herself becoming less with each drop extracted. Through the blood bond, Theron felt everything. Somewhere in the fortress, carrying dying Draven to safety, he collapsed under the weight of her suffering. His anguished roar echoed through stone corridors as he turned, running back toward the throne room with supernatural desperation. "Tomorrow night's full moon will amplify your blood's power," Valdris explained conversationally as he inserted more needles. "I'll inject it into my hybrid soldiers. They'll become unstoppable. Vampire, werewolf, witch, all perfected. Every supernatural creature will kneel or be converted." More needles, more agony. Lysandra's vision began to fade. "And you'll live just long enough to watch your precious prophecy die." "The prophecy," Lysandra gasped through the pain, "wasn't about me." Valdris paused. "What?" "It was about the choice." Understanding dawned with crystalline clarity. The prophecy didn't demand she defeat Valdris through superior power. It demanded she offer what he never had: freedom. Lysandra stopped fighting the needles, stopped resisting the chains. Instead, she opened herself completely to the primordial bloodline and reached through it. Not to Valdris, but to every hybrid in the fortress. She didn't command. She connected. Through blood magic older than kingdoms, she shared everything: her pain, her fear, her memories of being called abomination, of being rejected, enslaved, told she was lesser because of what she was. "I know what you are," she projected to every hybrid consciousness. "I know what it means to be broken and remade against your will. But you're still you underneath his magic. The choice is still there. Choose freedom. Choose yourselves." In laboratories where new hybrids were being forged, in prison cells where the converted awaited orders, across the entire fortress, Valdris's creations felt her presence, felt her offering them something their creator never had: agency. One hybrid stopped mid-task, then another, then dozens. The blood magic enslaving them was powerful, built through centuries of refinement. But it wasn't their choice. And Lysandra's primordial authority, the source of all vampire lineages, gave them permission to break free. They turned on Valdris. Hundreds of hybrid soldiers flooded the throne room, their enslaved expressions transforming into fierce determination. Valdris stared in shock as his creations surrounded him. "You're mine! I created you!" A vampire werewolf hybrid, half his face covered in fur, the other pale as death, stepped forward. "You made our bodies. She freed our souls. We choose her." The hybrids attacked their creator with the fury of slaves finally unchained. Valdris killed dozens with contemptuous ease, his forearms tearing through flesh and bone, his magic reducing attackers to ash. But they kept coming, choosing death over continued slavery. In the chaos, Lysandra broke free of the blood chains. She collapsed immediately, weak from the harvesting, but alive. Valdris, surrounded and desperate, made his final gambit. He began drawing life force from his remaining hybrids, all of them simultaneously. Screams filled the throne room as hundreds of his creations withered and died, their essence flooding into their creator. The transformation was horrific. Valdris's body swelled and twisted, absorbing characteristics from every hybrid he'd ever created. He became a chimera, vampire fangs in werewolf jaws, witch magic crackling around insectoid limbs, skin that was scales and fur and something that defied description. Barely recognizable as having once been vampire, he towered over the throne room as a monument to his own ideology taken to its ultimate conclusion. "If I can't have your blood willingly," his voice boomed with inhuman resonance, "I'll take it from your corpse!" The doors exploded inward. Theron burst through, but he was too far away, and Valdris was already lunging at Lysandra with impossible speed. She had one move left, one desperate gambit. Instead of dodging, Lysandra threw herself forward and embraced the monster. "You want my blood?" She grabbed Valdris with what strength remained, pressing her bleeding wounds against his transformed flesh. "Take it all!" She opened every channel of her primordial essence and flooded it directly into Valdris through physical contact. Not as healing, not as sharing, as assault. Pure primordial blood met hybrid chimera, and the reaction was catastrophic. Valdris's body began rejecting the transfusion immediately. His hybrid modifications, so carefully calibrated, so precisely balanced, couldn't handle the undiluted purity. Vampire parts warred with werewolf, witch magic collapsed into necromantic feedback, and through it all, the primordial essence burned like acid through his system. "What have you done?" Valdris thrashed, trying to separate from Lysandra, but she held on with grim determination. "Given you exactly what you wanted," she gasped. "Purity! Your hybrids couldn't survive it. Neither can you." Valdris's chimera form began tearing apart from the inside. Flesh split, bones cracked, his very essence fragmenting under the weight of what he'd tried to become versus what primordial blood demanded. His screams echoed through the fortress as he literally exploded. Body detonating into blood and bone fragments that painted the throne room in final testament to his ideology's failure. The grotesque throne collapsed with him, spines scattering across the blood-soaked floor. Lysandra fell, her legs unable to support her. Theron caught her before she hit the ground, his arms wrapping around her with desperate strength. "I had to stop him," she whispered, feeling her consciousness fading. She'd given too much, not just blood, but essence, the core of what made her primordial. "You did. You saved everyone." Theron's voice cracked. "Now let me save you." He bit his own wrist without hesitation and pressed it to her lips. "Drink. Take everything you need." "That could kill you. I don't care. I'm not losing you again. Not after everything. Drink, Lysandra. That's an order from your king consort." The blood touched her lips, and instinct took over. Lysandra drank, and through the sanguine bond, the exchange became something more than feeding. Their essences merged completely. Not vampire dominating Dampier, or vice versa, but true union. She took his strength, his memories, his absolute devotion. He experienced her pain, her determination, her love that had survived 5 years of hatred. Outside, unnoticed by either of them, the blood moon reached its apex. Midnight of the third night. The prophecy's deadline. Moonlight flooded through the throne room's shattered windows, and Lysandra's transformation completed. Not into pure vampire, into perfected Dampier. Her blood wings unfurled fully for the first time, no longer shifting liquid shadow, but solid crimson and gold, magnificent and terrible. Her eyes shifted from amber to crimson with gold flecks that caught the moonlight. Above her head, a crown of pure light formed. Not the physical blood crown, but manifestation of sovereign power. She rose, bringing Theron with her, their hands still clasped. And then, the prophecy's final words echoed through every supernatural consciousness across the 3 kingdoms. When blood of 2 worlds sits the throne, the eternal night shall know the dawn. Lysandra understood. She raised her free hand, and from her palm, light bloomed. Not moonlight, not torchlight. Daylight, gentle and warm and alive, the sun's radiance brought forth by a being who existed between vampire and human, between night and day. The light filled the throne room, but didn't burn the vampires present. It was dawn without destruction, illumination without agony. A new kind of light for a new age. This is the dawn, Lysandra said, her voice resonating with primordial authority and something more. Hope. Not destruction, but transformation. Not an end, but a beginning. Through the fortress, freed hybrids felt the light and wept. Outside, the Allied army saw dawn breaking in a throne room that should know only darkness and understood. The prophecy had been fulfilled. In distant Drakthar blood-rend, the Crimson Throne pulsed with recognition. In Jarvok Stormfang, werewolves howled not in challenge, but in celebration. In witch covens across the territories, priestesses woke from shared visions of a Dhampir queen crowned in light. Even the Fey courts, watching from their distant realms, finally stirred with interest. The eternal night had learned to know the dawn, and nothing would ever be the same. 3 days after the Battle of Varnock Ironclaw, and the fortress that had been a monument to horror was being transformed into something resembling hope. Lysandra walked through corridors where blood had been scrubbed from stone, where the bones of Valdris's victims had been given proper burial according to their respective traditions. The laboratories where he'd conducted his experiments had been destroyed completely, torn down to foundation stones and blessed by witches to prevent any lingering corruption. The cost had been devastating. Of Draven's 200 vampire warriors, only 47 survived. Alpha Kael's werewolf pack had been reduced from 150 to 89, and Kael himself had lost his left arm to a blood wraith's final strike. Morvana's covens had fared slightly better. 71 of 100 witches still lived, though many bore scars they'd carry for centuries. But they'd also freed over 200 hostages and 300 hybrids who'd broken Valdris's compulsion and chose life over slavery. Lysandra spent her days coordinating relief efforts, her newfound authority as prophesied Blood Queen opening doors that would have remained closed to a Dhampir exile. Healers from all 3 kingdoms worked side by side, vampire physicians sharing knowledge with witch herbalists, werewolf shamans collaborating with human doctors who'd been brought through the shadow roads. The freed hybrids presented the most complex challenge. Some wanted to remain as they were, having made peace with what they'd become. Others desperately sought restoration to their original forms. Lysandra used her primordial blood carefully, in measured doses, to help reverse unwilling hybridization for those who requested it. But she made one thing absolutely clear to everyone. Hybrids aren't abominations. Enslavement was the crime, not mixed blood. Anyone who chooses to remain hybrid will have full citizenship and protection under the new laws. On the 4th day, Seraphine's trial convened before a council representing all supernatural races. The once beautiful vampire had been captured during the battle's aftermath, her hybrid transformation leaving her corpse-like and rotting from necromantic backlash. She confessed everything: jealousy that had curdled into obsession, her alliance with Valdris, her role in Elder Kieran's betrayal and escape plan. "Execution," declared the vampire representative. "She betrayed her house, her prince, and conspired with our greatest enemy." "Agreed," growled a werewolf counselor. "Her actions cost us brothers and sisters." The witches nodded in solemn agreement. The verdict was unanimous, except for one voice. "Exile," Lysandra said quietly. Every head turned toward her. "Strip her of supernatural powers. Send her to the mortal realm to live as human." "Your Majesty," the vampire counselor objected. "She tried to kill you. Multiple times. She deserves death." "She deserves consequences, not vengeance." Lysandra met Seraphine's shocked gaze across the council chamber. "I won't become a queen who rules through executions. She'll live as mortal, aging and dying as humans do, knowing the world she tried to destroy is flourishing without her.
Seraphine's voice came out as a rasp through her damaged throat.
Why spare me?
Because mercy is a choice, and choices define us. Lysandra stood, her blood wings manifesting partially as emphasis. You taught me that. By being the opposite. You chose jealousy, cruelty, enslavement. I choose differently. The spell was cast that evening. Seraphine's vampire nature was stripped away, leaving her fully human for the first time in 150 years. She aged visibly, lines appearing around her eyes, her hair dulling from midnight black to gray-streaked. Guards escorted her through the shadow roads to the mortal realm, where she would live out whatever years remained to her. The political aftermath reshaped the supernatural world. With Elder Kieran dead by his own curse and Valdris destroyed, the Shadow Court dissolved. The surviving elders fled to distant territories or bent knee to the new order, their 1,000-year stranglehold on vampire politics finally broken. The three kingdoms formed an unprecedented alliance, formalized in what became known as the Dawn Accords. No supernatural race held supremacy over others. Hybrids and dampers were recognized as equal citizens with full rights. Interspecies cooperation was encouraged rather than forbidden. And a council of 3, vampire, werewolf, and witch representatives, would govern disputes. When the council offered Lysandra rulership of all 3 kingdoms, she refused. I'm not an empress, I'm a bridge. She stood before the assembled representatives in what had once been Valdris's throne rooms, now cleansed and reconsecrated. Theron will rule Drakthar Bloodrend as prince. Alpha Kael continues leading Jarvuk Stormfang. Varnuk Ironclaw will be governed collectively by freed hybrids who choose to remain here. And I will serve as Blood Queen, a position above politics, focused on maintaining balance between all peoples. The coronation was held at dawn in the blood gardens of Drakthar Bloodrend. Lysandra created her gentle dawn light so all supernatural races could attend together. Vampires standing in sunlight that didn't burn, werewolves in human form beside their wolf-born kin, witches, fae ambassadors who'd finally chosen a side, and most revolutionary of all, human representatives witnessing vampire ceremony for the first time in history. High Priestess Morvana officiated as the eldest supernatural present. She held the blood crown, the same one that had rolled to Lysandra's feet and changed everything, and her voice carried ancient authority. Do you accept the mantle of Blood Queen? To bridge worlds, to defend the defenseless, to rule through choice rather than compulsion? I do, Lysandra said, her voice steady. For now and always. The crown was placed on her head, and this time it settled willingly, recognizing its sovereign with a pulse of silver light that made even the fae murmur in appreciation. Do you accept Theron Ravenshade as your king consort? Your partner in sovereignty? I do. Lysandra pulled Theron to his feet from where he'd knelt in partnership, not submission. Stand beside me. We rule together or not at all. The blood gardens erupted. Werewolves howled in celebration, their voices carrying across kingdoms. Witches chanted blessings in the old tongue. Humans applauded, a strange sound in vampire ceremony, but welcome. And vampires spoke blood oaths of loyalty that echoed through the dawn. In quieter moments after the ceremony, Lysandra found time for those who'd made her ascension possible. Captain Draven, recovering in the healer's wing, accepted her visit with characteristic stoicism. You saved us all, Captain. Just doing my duty, Your Majesty. Draven. She sat beside his bed. You were Dampier once, elevated to near vampire status through ritual.
Would you want your Dampier nature restored? You have the choice now. He considered for a long moment. No, I chose transformation then, and I choose to remain as I am now. But thank you for asking, for making it a choice. That's the point of all this. Choices. Alpha Kael found her in the gardens, his remaining arm carrying a ceremonial staff carved by his pack. Blood Queen. My packs pledge loyalty, not submission. Loyalty. I accept, Alpha, and I pledge the same. We're allies, not master and servant. His scarred face split in a fierce grin. The pups are already singing songs about you. The Dawn Queen who taught the night to smile. Lysandra laughed, the first genuine, unguarded joy she'd felt in weeks. I'll have to hear these songs. Be careful. Werewolf pups are terrible poets. High Priestess Morvana pulled her aside during the evening celebration. I'm proud of you. The frightened girl who came to me 5 years ago has become something magnificent. I'm still frightened, Lysandra admitted. Now I'm just frightened with responsibilities. Good. Fear keeps us honest. It's certainty that makes tyrants. Morvana's weathered hand squeezed hers. Will you let an old witch stay and offer counsel? Always. Someone has to keep me from doing something heroically stupid again. As twilight painted the blood gardens in shades of purple and gold, Lysandra and Theron slipped away from the crowds. They found a secluded corner where blood roses bloomed in response to their presence, their bioluminescence creating a private sanctuary of light. Regrets? Theron asked softly. Lysandra leaned against him, feeling the blood bond hum contentedly between them. I regret the 5 years we lost, the pain you endured alone, the family I'll never see again. But I don't regret who I've become. The prophecy, the power, the responsibility. It's mine now, by choice. She turned to face him. You've helped me rewrite what it means to be vampire, to be Dampier, to rule. We rewrote it together. Theron cupped her face gently. I couldn't have done any of this without you forcing me to kneel, to stand beside you, to believe even when everything seemed impossible. Their kiss deepened, the blood bond flaring with shared contentment and love that had survived exile, betrayal, and war. How long do we have? Lysandra asked when they finally broke apart. Before the next crisis, the next threat? Does it matter? We face it together. Together. I like that word. They stood at the garden's edge, watching the sun set and the moon rise, the Dampier queen who could exist in both, who'd taught the eternal night to know the dawn. What do you see when you look at the future? Theron asked. Lysandra's eyes glowed crimson gold as her blood wings unfurled partially, catching the last light of day and the first glow of evening. Dawn. Endless, infinite dawn. Not the end of night, but balance. Light and dark. Human and vampire. Choice and destiny. Everything we were told couldn't coexist. Thriving. And us? Forever, however long that is. Forever's a good start. They stood silhouetted against twilight, her hand in his, blood wings partially spread like a crimson cloak. Around them, the blood gardens filled with supernatural creatures of every kind, vampires and werewolves sharing space, witches and hybrids in conversation, even humans walking freely among immortals. The prophecy's final words,
whispered through Lysandra's consciousness. When blood of two worlds sits the throne, the eternal night shall know the dawn. She who was broken shall mend the world. She who was exiled shall become home itself. And Lysandra understood with perfect clarity. They'd called her abomination, half-breed, mongrel. They were right. She was all those things. And she was queen. Not in spite of her mixed blood, but because of it. Because bridges were needed more than shores. Because unity required someone willing to stand between worlds and refuse to choose just one. The dawn had come, and this was only the beginning. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. Your time, your attention, and your support truly mean the world to me. I appreciate every single one of you. Now tell me, what do you think happens next in this story? Drop your predictions in the comments. You never know, the next twist might come from your idea. And before you go, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more amazing stories. Let me know where in the world you're watching from too. I love seeing how far this family reaches. Once again, thank you. You're the real reason these stories keep coming to life.